And welcome to Law and Crime Now, everybody. I'm Jesse Weber, and thanks for joining us. We're going to start with the arrest of Tyrese Haspil. This is the man who's been charged with second-degree murder for allegedly brutally killing his boss, tech CEO FAHIM Saleh, who was found dismembered in his Manhattan apartment. You've probably heard about this story. Now, there is a lot to talk about in this case, but where we're going to start is with the statements from the NYPD the NYPD chief of detectives, Rodney Harrison, who spoke about and provided more details on the arrest of Haspil.
At approximately 8:45 this morning, 21-year-old Tyrese Haspil, H-A-S-P-I-L, was taken into custody in the lobby of 172 Crosby Street by members of the New York-New Jersey Regional Fugitive Task Force and transported to the 7th Precinct for arrest processing. On Tuesday, July 14th, Mr. FAHIM Saleh's cousin discovered his dismembered body in the living room of his apartment with his head, arms, and legs amputated. Upon further investigation, it was revealed that on Monday, July 13th, at approximately 1:45 p.m., Mr. Saleh was assaulted by Mr. Haspil with what appears to be a conductive energy weapon, better known as a taser, while exiting an elevator into his apartment. If I could just explain that real quickly, the way this building is set up, when you go up in the elevator, it takes you right to your apartment and not into a hallway.
Yeah, that's what we're dealing with here. Now, Haspil was arraigned. He's pled not guilty. A lot to talk about. I want to bring in my panel right now. I'm joined by forensic psychiatrist Dr. Cohen and Law and Crime legal analyst Terri Austin. It's great to have you both here. Terri, let's start with the defense. So he's pled not guilty, and his lawyers have issued a statement. They said, "We urge the public to keep an open mind, and there is much more to this narrative than the accusations, an arrest by the police, and a charge by the district attorney." How do you interpret that statement? Do you interpret it as, hey, we have more information about what's going here, or he can't be tried in the court of public opinion, we just have to see if the prosecution makes their case? How do you view that statement?
Well, you know, obviously he is innocent until proven guilty, but I can't imagine that they have more here when we know already that there is at least one video showing Haspil following the victim. And so I'm not sure what other explanation could exist. There is no excuse for tasing someone, stabbing him 5 or 6 times, and then dismembering the body. So it remains to be seen what more they have to say.
Not just the surveillance footage of the actual moment of the tasing. They also apparently have surveillance footage of him using Saleh's credit card after his death. Evidence of him buying supplies to ultimately cut up the body. And so we see a very strong case here at this point. Now, Dr. Cohen, I want to turn it over to you because I've heard a lot of different cases. And unfortunately, here on Law and Crime, we've covered dismemberments. Can you break it down to us, whether it was Haspil or someone else? What goes into the mentality? What goes into the mindset of someone to have the will to kill someone, come back to the body, and then dismember a human body, literally chop it up?
So there can be a number of reasons for it. I think that, in general, when we think of dismemberment, we think that that does speak to premeditation or towards planning, and so it tends to not be so good for the defendant. But, you could also imagine a situation where someone an extreme emotional disturbance, which is the kind of defense which would reduce a murder charge.
Doctor, I'm sorry to interrupt. You broke up a little there, and I want to make sure our viewers get that. Can you repeat what you just said? You were going into a little bit about how the makeup of someone who can do something like this.
Yeah, so I was saying, usually dismemberment points towards something like premeditation or planning, somebody trying to cover their tracks, and that tends to not be very good for the defendant's legal case. But dismemberment could also be seen in something like a crime of passion, where someone could do it in a frenzy, and then it could point to what's called extreme emotional disturbance, which is a defense strategy, a psychological defense strategy, which would reduce a murder charge to a manslaughter charge. So, there have definitely been cases like that where somebody has become so frenzied when they've been attacking someone that they've lost control and really dismembered the body. So it can point to a couple different scenarios.
But it comes down to the fundamental question, why did this happen? Why would someone have done this to this man? And that was sort of addressed. I mean, I should note, investigators are keeping some details pretty close here, but this was discussed by Rodney Harrison a little bit during this press conference.
Due to the active and ongoing investigation, I will not get into the actual cause of death. The extensive investigation led by the 7th Precinct Detective Squad, Manhattan South Homicide, identified the perpetrator in less than 3 days and revealed that Mr. Haspil was Mr. Saleh's executive assistant and handled his finances and personal matters. It is also believed that he owed the victim a significant amount of money.
Now, that part I want to talk about, Terry, the motive here, that apparently Haspil owed Saleh money, that if you read the reports, he actually stole money from him, and this was to be forgiven by the CEO, who actually said he fired him, but was going to allow him possibly to pay off the money. So as we're trying to understand what would lead somebody to do this, what would lead somebody to dress in all black and engage in this pre-planned attack, the motive here I find interesting. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree, Jesse. I think that if, in fact, the victim was trying to give Haspil some leeway here, that he didn't have to pay the money back, that he could do it slowly and in installments, and he didn't file a report, and I think that's important, you would have to think, why then is Haspil still trying to, get away with murder here and kill his boss? It really does make the motive seem very selfish, very focused on the fact that he just didn't want to pay the money back. And I guess we could say that the motive here is the money, because he's being very greedy. And in fact, he's not really taking into consideration the fact that Saleh, his boss, is giving him all of this, leeway. So it's a horrible crime.
And Terry, just to give our viewers an understanding, they're saying probably, why second-degree murder? This seemed like a pre-planned attack. Why not first-degree murder? But here in New York, things are a little different, right? Exactly.
It's very limited when you can get first-degree here in New York. Either you're, accused of killing a police officer or you're serving a life sentence. There are also some felony murders that can be associated with both first and second-degree murder, frankly. But most intentional murders in New York are second-degree murder. So it's a little different than most other states.
Dr. Cohen, let's fast forward a little bit. Let's say this does go to a trial. Let's say he is the man who's ultimately tried for this heinous attack. Everybody might be looking at this and say, hey, look, a guy chopped up the body of another person. He must be insane. Does he fit within that category of insanity based upon what you've seen?
I think that his attorneys would be remiss if they did not investigate that possibility. Unfortunately, the reality is considered insane.
Doctor, I hate to do this to you again. You seem to be freezing. So again, I just want to reiterate a little bit. We're talking about insanity. My understanding is it's a pretty high burden here, and I believe the burden is to establish ultimately that he could not appreciate the consequences of what he was doing or establish what he knew was wrong. That's my understanding. Please correct me if I'm wrong. And based upon the details alleged by the investigators, do you think at this point it could be a viable defense?
I think that the attorneys would definitely be remiss if they didn't investigate that possibility on behalf of their client. What they're going to need to show, though, is more than the behavior itself, because the behavior itself is ambiguous. It could also be interpreted and no doubt would be brought forward by the prosecution as evidence of premeditation, planning, and a rational actor. When you see someone, for example, potentially dismembering a body so that they can cover up their tracks, that can be very devastating.
Yeah, and Terry, look, I mean, the evidence against Haspil, as I said, is quite strong, including him allegedly leaving the apartment when he heard the cousin coming up and him buying the supplies. But one of the first things that investigators tried to think about is, was Saleh killed by an international component because he had these international ties? And there was a suggestion that this looked like a professional hit. Now that's strange because we have Haspil, who has no criminal record here. And there was another theory put forward that did he try to make it look like a professional hit to cast away any suspicion on him? Your thoughts on that?
Well, I definitely think that this was a premeditated murder. The fact that he purchased all of these products before he actually went in to clean up, et cetera. And, you know, he had a taser, so he knew he wanted to make sure the victim wasn't able to respond. But I do think the fact that he dressed in all black meant that he was trying to cover who he was. And there was at least one report that said before Saleh died, he kind of looked at the defendant as though he recognized him, as if to say, what are you doing here? And so it could very well be that he was trying to mask his identity and make it look as though someone else, maybe an international hit, was occurring.
But clearly he didn't clean his tracks too well because he was arrested and charged, a case we will be following. When we come back after our break, we're going to focus on another case we've been following. You might have heard of it, Ghislaine Maxwell. A lot to talk about there. Stay tuned. Welcome back, everybody. Time to talk about Ghislaine Maxwell. This is Jeffrey Epstein's alleged accomplice or alleged criminal accomplice here. And as you know, she has been hit with multiple felonies regarding the enticement, recruitment, and transportation of minors for sex abuse and then lying about it. And there's a lot we keep talking about, and particularly the fact that there have been reactions and new developments in light of a judge denying her bail. I want to start right now with Virginia Roberts-Giuffre, who actually is one of Epstein's accusers. She spoke with CBS this morning, talked a little bit about what we should know about Ghislaine Maxwell's role in all of this.
I said, why are you having all these girls come in and sleep with your boyfriend? And she was like, so I don't have to do it all the time, you know, so she made like a joke out of it.
Why do you think she did it?
She did it to keep Jeffrey happy, for sure. She did it because she loves the control over people. Jeffrey was a sick pedophile, but she was the mastermind.
Dr. Cohen, I want to start with you here. This aspect of control I find fascinating. You heard her speak about it. That's her opinion. What is your opinion? If the accusations, if the charges, if all of this is true against Maxwell and her doing this to help or make Jeffrey Epstein happy, that aspect of control, what's your theory on it?
Well, I think that we can look at the data to help us understand. And, you know, when you look at data on female sex offenders, you certainly see that a large number of them are co-offending with a man. And it does tend to be the case that when women co-offend in terms of sexual offenses with a male partner, they are tending to follow the proclivities of that partner. So, for example, heterosexual women who are co-offending with a heterosexual male tend to victimize other women. So I think that, you know, obviously I don't know whether Ghislaine Maxwell is guilty of what she's accused, but the accusations that are put forth do fit a pattern of what we know about female co-offenders with men. And so typically it's theorized that those women are trying to please the men because they are following.
That's just, it's pretty remarkable to think about that. Again, that aspect of control here and that aspect of this is what you talk about, these co-offenders, really that everybody's confused. Why was she doing this for Jeffrey Epstein? So that's a big question, the why here. Now, Terri, let me turn it to you because during this bail hearing, big revelation that Ghislaine Maxwell is purportedly married, she has the secret husband, and that she hasn't revealed the identity of this husband to investigators. So my question to you is twofold. One, why would she not reveal the identity of this husband? And two, how could this husband ultimately play into her legal case?
Well, I think she didn't reveal the identity because she's either protecting him or she doesn't want him to testify against her. And, you know, in fact, he has the option of whether or not, because there is obviously a spousal immunity if in fact they were married, and that's one thing they'd have to establish. But he could very well have information that she doesn't want to have revealed that he could testify about. So I think she did not mention him because she doesn't want him to be exposed. And in fact, as far as I'm concerned, it shows that she has this, you know, propensity to lie. And in fact, I think the judge made the right decision here to not grant her bail.
But if you have someone who also knows about her finances, maybe shares bank accounts with her, could that be utilized by prosecutors in any way? What are the rules there? Because I know that, again, absolutely, her finances have come under question and investigation.
Absolutely. And you always follow the money. And if the authorities can do that with or without her purported spouse, they will absolutely do it. And if they contact him, if they find out the identity and they ask him questions, you know, through some sort of investigation, they could very well find more information about the finances. As you recall, during the bail hearing, finances was a huge part of the hearing itself.
Do you think, Terry, there could be a situation when, and we talk about possible defenses here, we could talk about plea deals, we've talked about that a lot, but if we're talking about manipulation where she could put the blame on Epstein and say that she was coerced into doing all this, that she was trying to help him, she was trying to please him, is that something from a legal point of view might be her best defense? She might have real trouble getting out of the perjury charges. Those are more straightforward, simpler charges to prove. But if we're talking about a conspiracy charge, a transportation charge, her role, I mean, what are actual legal defenses here besides the fact of her saying prosecution can't prove the case or I didn't do it?
Yeah, I mean, I think the fact that they can charge her with conspiracy, she's really in a difficult position because here they're going to have to show that she has some, you know, connection to the crime. And they have all of that information. They know she traveled with him. She can claim that she didn't know what he was doing and she wasn't involved. But I think they have enough circumstantial information to say that she was part and parcel. And frankly, they have all of these witnesses who are saying that she was the one who identified the girls and who brought these women who were, you know, underage to Epstein. So she is definitely part and parcel of it. And it's going to be difficult, I think, for her to defend the case.
I'd like to move on from one high-profile female defendant to another. Let's go to Colorado for Leticia Stock. Now, this is the Colorado woman who is accused of killing her 11-year-old stepson, Gannon. Very high-profile case here. And it has been announced that the court has agreed to have it be conducted a mental health competency evaluation of this mother, or of the stepmother, I should say. And she's going to be sent to a state hospital to have this mental health evaluation completed. Now, I want to start with this case by beginning when Stock was arrested. And Gannon's mother spoke out in a press conference. Just listen to this. Listen to the pain in her voice talking about this development.
Today, I got the worst news and the best news. Obviously, we know what the worst news is, but the best news is that justice will be served. And I'll make sure that justice is served because my boy did not deserve any of this that has happened to him. So I urge media one more time just to hold off on questions until we know that this person, the stepmom that I even trusted, that she will pay 100% for this heinous thing she done.
All right, Dr. Cohen, what are mental health evaluators looking for when they're determining the issue of competency to stand trial?
So the issue of competency to stand trial is really looking at the person's mental state now. So it really doesn't look back to the crime. We're not asking what was her mental state at the time of the offense. We're asking right now in the present, does she understand the charges against her? Does she understand?
Dr. Cohen, we keep breaking up. Bad connection. We live in the pandemic world right now. I'm going to come back to you in a minute. Maybe we can get that straightened out. Terri, let's go to the legal point of view here. So the idea of, is she competent to stand trial? I know that's a separate issue in terms of insanity or anything like that. What are some of the options that could happen here? You know, if she's determined to be incompetent, if she can't stand trial, does that mean that she stays in jail or a state hospital until she's eventually competent to stand trial? How would this play out?
That's exactly right. So if they are deemed not to be competent, they get put into a mental health facility until such time that they are deemed competent, which means, as the doctor was saying, that they understand the charges against them. So they could be charged, they could be in prison, they can even be indicted, but the trial cannot go forward unless they understand those charges that have been brought against them. And that can last for an indefinite amount of time. There has been case law that says until they are competent, and if they are not found competent, then they can stay in jail for quite some time.
And let's not forget, when we try to understand why is this become an issue, not only think about what she's accused of here, because there's probable cause to believe that Gannon was killed in his room, there was blood all over the place, and she's also accused of trying to escape prison. So you get a sense of the defendant we're talking about here. Terri, question for you. The prosecution had tried to get a hold of, I believe, her, or had tried to get subpoenas from the judge for her mental health records back in the day. Does that signify to you, and this was denied, does that signify to you that the prosecution is saying, I want to see what her mental health was back in the day, because maybe they're just faking it now. Maybe she's just faking it now. Do you get that sense?
Yes, and I also think that the prosecution wants to know what they have to deal with. Like the doctor said, the competency is to determine where her status is now, but these records would determine what her status was, at least her mental health, while the trial or while the crime was being conducted. So I think the prosecution looking for these records is going to want to see what they have that they will be dealing with at trial, what the defense might be trying to propose at trial. So yeah, I think they're just getting ready.
And in terms of Terri, we've covered a number of cases where a caregiver, perhaps a parent, a babysitter, is charged and ultimately convicted for what happens to the child. Do you think this is a strong case?
I do, and it's horrible. You saw what the mother was saying there. This victim was 11 years old. You put the child in the custody of an adult that the child is trusting. So I think it's a horrible case. I think that if they have enough evidence, hopefully justice will be done. She said there that it's a good day and a bad day because obviously her son is not coming home, a good day because at least they have someone that they can point the finger to, and hopefully they'll get a conviction if the evidence shows that.
Yeah. Well, it's we'll see what happens, because September 8th is the next court date to determine. The judge will see what are the competency results and how do we move forward. Dr. Cohen, I understand we have to sign you off, and I appreciate you coming on. I wish you had a better connection. Maybe next time. We'll take a break. When we come back, a lot more stories for you. Welcome back. Let's talk about the AHMAUD Arbery shooting out of Atlanta, Georgia, because we're still breaking down that huge hearing for the defendants. I should really say it was a hearing mostly focused on William Bryant, and he didn't have a great day. Not only was the motion for bail denied, so he's currently in jail, but his other motions made by his attorney all failed, including a motion to try to have the current DA removed from the case. But there's a lot to break down. But a lot that people are talking about is this moment right here. Take a listen.
As indicted, he's facing not just 18 months that speculatively he might be held upon prior to trial. By my calculations, he's facing potentially life without the possibility of parole, plus at least 27.5 years. That's a significant amount of time and the most serious charge that can be levied against the defendant in the state of Georgia. There are texts to support the DOJ's investigation. I've revealed this to Mr. Goff, and he knows that we talked about it on the phone. I can confirm as of yesterday that the GBI has opened an additional parallel investigation into sex crimes.
All right, now that sex crimes investigation was confirmed by the GBI, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. Who else and who better to talk about this than Tony Thomas, WSB-TV anchor out of Georgia, who was at that hearing. Tony, great to have you here on Law and Crime Now. So I want to ask you a two-part question here. A, what can you tell us, if anything, about this sex crimes investigation into William Bryan? And number two, what was it like to be in that hearing?
It was very interesting because they dropped that bombshell pretty late into the day in all this hearing. We know that alleged sex crime investigation first popped onto the authorities in Camden County, which is a small county just south of Brunswick where this is going on, right on the Florida-Georgia line. It happened on Thursday. It was immediately referred to the GBI. This hearing held the very next day. Everything going through the GBI not discussing anything else involved in this, except to say they are conducting a, quote, parallel investigation into Roddy Bryan and this potential sex crimes case.
Is there evidence that we don't know about yet? I mean, my understanding is these charges that were brought against Bryan came after the search of the McMichaels residence. And I'm curious from your perspective, what do we not know yet? What is it that we're looking for? What evidence do you believe maybe was gathered, or what evidence could we try to surmise might have been gathered from a search? I mean, from your point of view, what do we not know yet?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I'm not sure exactly what they found in that search. One other thing, though, we do know is the only person who's held lengthy discussions, interview sessions with the GBI and the detectives is William Roddy Bryan. What he said in those interviews that may have led them to do this, we're not sure, but it was fairly quickly after they did those search warrants on the McMichaels home, and also they also looked around Bryan's home as well, which is just 5 or 6 doors down, that they ultimately went and arrested Bryan as well.
And the status of the hate crime charges or any federal charges, I know that was brought up during the hearing as well. Any insight on that?
Still ongoing, no word on when that might end. We do know he's now in a suspect or being investigated in 3 different cases. This one in Brunswick on the murder case where he faces 9 different charges. The sex crimes investigation that's underway by the GBI in the county just south. And then he said that potential federal hate crime situation technically being investigated by the Southern District of Georgia. No late update on when that may wrap up and if there will be actual charges filed.
Well, we talked about it being a tough day for William Bryan. It was also not a great day for his attorney, Kevin Goff. I mean, listen to the judge here, just kind of getting frustrated at Goff for trying to seemingly argue his entire case during a hearing when that's not called for. Take a look.
I'm not trying your case today. We've only had a 7-hour preliminary hearing. I've read that transcript. I'm fully aware of that evidence. So we're not going back over all of the preliminary hearing matters, as well as retrying the case in the context of a bond hearing. If you've got issues specific to bond, then so be it. I'm aware of the authority, but the authority isn't try your case on the day of the bond and then just kind of see how the chips lie. That's not what we're going to do here today. So if there's evidence that you wish to present, that there's an objection to, now's an opportunity for the two to talk about it. If there's no stipulations reached, we'll see what the status of that conversation is and what we have to hear today. But I'd like to get into the bond hearing. So we're going to take a 10-minute recess.
So, Tony, you had a better seat to this than I did, but I sensed this kind of frustration on the part of the judge. And I was curious, from what you've seen so far, what can you glean from the defense tactics, the defense strategies of these defense attorneys, particularly Kevin Goff?
Well, it's kind of interesting because for the McMichaels, their attorneys have barely filed anything. They've been relatively quiet, showing up when they needed to. Kevin Goff, on the other hand, the local attorney here for Roddy Bryan, has been very active, filing motion after motion after motion. And you're right, it did get on the nerve of the judge. Kevin Goff's intent going into that hearing was basically to get any information he could out of that hearing, because he knows with COVID-19 and everything else going on, it could be months or longer before they get back in court. At one point earlier in the week, he even had a private investigator trying to serve a appearance notice on the Attorney General of the state of Georgia to appear at that Friday hearing, because he wanted to question him about how they went through the different district attorneys that recused themselves and got to the current appointed district attorney from Cobb County up in the Atlanta area. He was trying to pull out all the cards he could, introduce, get any evidence he could, the videos, the surveillance videos, everything he wanted to try to present at that hearing, a bond hearing. And the judge was kind of right. He was trying to put the whole trial as much as he could, his case out there, right in that one bond hearing.
Terri, is that strange? Is that strange lawyer tactics at this point of the case?
Well, what's strange about it, Jesse, is the fact that this is apparently the attorney for the individual who theoretically had the least to do with this crime. Yes, he cornered Ahmaud Arbery with the car, but initially their claim was he wasn't really involved. And so for Goff, the attorney, to make all of these motions, 3 on that day, and he apparently filed others that they didn't get a chance, he was objecting to the mask. He's making this a case where he is showcasing his legal skills. And I think he needs to think twice about, is he helping his own client? And maybe he should be sitting back a little bit.
Well, we heard from several voices during this hearing, including Ahmaud Arbery's mother, who petitioned the court to deny bail, which, as we said, they ultimately did. Here's what she had to say.
I am asking this court to say no. He cannot go home. He did not allow my son to go home. My son ran away. My son actually ran around him, and my son actually ran for his life. But William Bryan did not allow my son to return home. So I stand before you as the mother of Ahmaud, asking this court to give Mr. Bryan the same energy that he gave my son. There is not enough evidence to establish this unrepentant man in being a danger to this community. He lived just feet from where my son was murdered. I lived just miles away from where my son was murdered. I'm actually scared, Judge, to stay inside of my home. I've actually put my house up for sale.
Now, Tony, this is a case that's being followed by everyone across the nation, but you're there. And I'm curious if you'll walk us through what that feeling is like in the community, because we almost got a sense of it in the courtroom when Kevin Goff tried to object to certain masks being worn, as they're being called political statements. And that just kind of gave a flavor there of there are a lot of different factors in this case. So what is it like in the community? What is it like with being around this and being a part of an area that everybody's watching?
Well, it's something this town of about 16,000 that's not in a major media market at all is definitely not used to. That mask you're talking about, it was worn apparently in the courtroom. I did not personally see it, by Lee Merritt, the attorney for Arbery's mom there that you just heard. His mask was a George Floyd, had some comment about the George Floyd case on it, not directly related to this case, but that's what came up in open court. The city of Brunswick itself, you hear some I Run with Ahmaud posters and stuff. You see them around town, but it's when you actually get over into this neighborhood where this happened that you really feel a sense of, I don't know if you call it frustration, but worry and some tension. And the Arbery's live just across a state highway, a 4-lane highway in another subdivision across the street. So you can imagine her worry if anybody were to get out on bond, they'd be less than a mile from her house where she currently lives.
Tony, I was hoping you could explain something to me. We hear a possible defense, particularly from Kevin Goff, of this citizen's arrest, that the McMichaels were not doing anything illegal. They were engaging in their lawful right under Georgia law to apprehend someone that they believed there was probable cause to arrest. Now, this concept of the citizen's arrest, how is it being viewed in your area? Is it something that, you know, when we first heard about people, I'm surprised that's even talked about? Or is that something in the community, maybe where Arbery was killed, where that's a common understanding? I mean, how is that idea of the citizen's arrest viewed?
It's controversial now, for sure. I don't think a lot of people had heard about that law until this all came about. And in fact, the debate over whether there should be a citizen's arrest law or whether it should be changed in some way is before hearings right now in the Georgia legislature up in Atlanta, whether this law allows somebody, if you see a felony being committed, you have the right to stop and detain somebody for police. Opponents say there's enough police force now out and about in the communities. You don't need that law as much anymore. It was written many, many years ago when there weren't police forces in every community. It is a hot topic for debate statewide now, and whether it was used legally or not in this case, a very hot topic as well.
And you heard Kevin Goff say, because the McMichaels didn't do anything wrong, then my client didn't do anything wrong. It was a memorandum prepared in anticipation of this hearing, but it gives a sense of his defense strategy. Tony Thomas, thank you so much. Appreciate your insight. We'll take a break. When we come back, another important and high-profile police-related killing that we are going to be talking about here, Rayshard Brooks. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everybody. Let's talk about Rayshard Brooks. This is the man out of Atlanta who was killed outside of a Wendy's by police after this physical altercation with officers turned bad. Let's specifically talk about DA Paul Howard, who filed the charges and spearheaded the case against former Officer Garrett Rolfe, as well as Officer Devin Brosnan. Well, Howard is currently being investigated by the GBI, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. And a deal that he purportedly helped to orchestrate is raising a lot of questions. To begin, you want to hear who DA Paul Howard is? This was him during the press conference announcing the charges.
Once Mr. Brooks was shot, there is an Atlanta policy that requires that the officers have to provide timely medical attention to Mr. Brooks or to anyone who is injured. But after Mr. Brooks was shot, for some period of 2 minutes and 12 seconds, there was no medical attention applied to Mr. Brooks. But when we examined the videotape and in our discussions with witnesses, what we discovered is during the 2 minutes and 12 seconds that Officer Rolfe actually kicked Mr. Brooks while he laid on the ground, while he was there fighting for his life. Secondly, from the videotape, we were able to see that the other officer, Officer Brosnan, actually stood on Mr. Brooks's shoulders while he was there struggling for his life. We were able to conclude that based on the way that these officers conducted themselves while Mr. Brooks was lying there, that the demeanor of the officers immediately after the shooting did not reflect any fear or danger of Mr. Brooks, but their actions really reflected other kinds of emotions.
All right, Terry. Now, Howard is the top of this. He's spearheading this case. There's a lot riding on him, and yet he's under investigation. Let's start with this. The subpoenas apparently he issued in this case were done without a grand jury. That's my understanding. Correct me if I'm wrong. Is that a problem, and is it such a problem that this might derail the case against Brosnan and Rolfe?
You know, Jesse, of all of the issues that he's facing, I think this is the least problematic. Yes, you know, usually the subpoena is going to be issued when there is a grand jury, but he could have had enough probable cause to go ahead and issue the subpoena. So I think if in fact there was some evidence, he has all of these videos, he can justify why he needed the subpoena. I think the other issues he's being investigated for are more problematic than this particular issue.
Before we even get into the other issues, and I do want to get into them, he says this was just a mistake. This was a mistake by somebody who worked in his office about whether to issue the subpoenas without the grand jury, and not going to happen again. But there has been an analysis done where some say that he may have engaged in criminal behavior here if he had made any false statement here. Is that, do you believe that that's a viable claim?
If he made false statements, yes, absolutely, it's a viable claim. The way I look at this is, if in hindsight, no harm, no foul, then he should be okay. If in fact he made truthful statements, if in fact he would have gotten a subpoena in any event, if in fact he's basing this on the evidence that he had at the time, I think he will come out of this particular issue on top. But, you know, if he made false statements, that could very well be a big issue for him.
Because really, people are looking at this as a sign that he was rushing to bring charges against the officers. That's the main criticism of Howard bringing these charges, because the GBI hadn't even finished their investigation. So that's the main criticism. Now, you mentioned the other issues. Let's get into them. So there's this other issue, and I'll actually tie them together. One, that he allegedly took grant money to give himself a higher salary to supplement his income. And two, and this one's very interesting, that he apparently worked out a deal, allegedly, to have these convicted educators, they were convicted in this cheating scandal, to make sure that they don't go to prison. And he did this, allegedly, as a way to gain the support of a popular lawyer because his election is coming up soon. These two claims, the taking of the money, or at least using the money in an improper way, and working out this deal for his own re-election purposes, again, not directly tied to the Rayshard Brooks case, but if this becomes too big of an issue, could it affect whether he still stays on it and what ultimately happens here?
Well, it could not only affect the case, he could be taken off the case, but it could affect his career. Funneling money and commingling funds is a huge issue. And, you know, as a prosecutor, he knows better than that. And if, in fact, he took several $100,000, funneled it into his own bank account, you know, he could be brought up for charges for that. He certainly could have some issues as far as the bar of Georgia is concerned. So that's a problem. And the fact that, you know, there was this conviction of this scandalous event with all of these educators, and he gave them a light deal in exchange for an endorsement of one of them, that too could be a very big issue because it's a conflict of interest. And he has to stay above that. He has to show the people of Georgia that he is fair, unbiased, and that he's bringing charges on behalf of not just this case, but every case without being unduly influenced. So those are problems.
He has to be beyond reproach, especially when you're dealing with a case that's so important. Again, as we say with most of the cases we will cover, we'll see what happens here. But with the DA coming under investigation, everybody's going to be watching for the next steps. Terri Austin, I appreciate you coming on and breaking down all of these important cases with me. A pleasure as always. Everybody out there, thank you for joining us tonight. We will be back later in the week covering the other most important cases facing the nation. We'll be back.